Jake Morrison stood in the center of the massive chamber, his hands folded behind his back. The room stretched high above him, its walls made of some crystal material that glowed with soft blue light. 12 different alien species sat in curved rows around him, each group looking down from their elevated platforms. The air smelled strange, like metal and something sweet he couldn't name. He had practiced this moment for months. Every word, every gesture, every breath had been planned. This was humanity's chance to join the Galactic Council as full members, not just the junior partners they had been for 50 years. Honored representatives, Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's perfect acoustics. I come before you today to present humanity's formal request for full membership in this council. A low rumble came from the Corvin section. Their leader, a creature that looked like a walking tree, made of silver metal, shifted in his seat. Jake had dealt with Trade Minister Ziegfeld before. The alien never missed a chance to remind humans how primitive their technology was. Jake continued speaking, pulling up holographic displays that showed human achievements. In the past 50 years, humans have contributed significantly to galactic civilization. We have shared our fusion reactor designs, which now power 30% of all space stations in the Outer Rim. Our medical research has eliminated 6 major diseases that plagued multiple species. The Ethereal Collective's representative, a being of pure energy contained in a floating crystal, pulsed with what Jake had learned was their equivalent of laughter. Fusion reactors, the being spoke directly into everyone's minds. How quaint. We were using antimatter cores when your species was still learning to make fire. Jake kept his expression neutral. He had expected this. Perhaps honored ethereal. But our fusion designs have proven more stable and easier to maintain. That's why they're used so widely. Chancellor Vexthal of this Eltharian Empire leaned forward. The reptilian being's scales caught the chamber's light, making him look like he was covered in tiny mirrors. Stable, yes, but hardly innovative. Any species can make something simple work. True advancement requires pushing boundaries, taking risks, which is exactly what we've done, Jake replied smoothly. He gestured, and new holographic images appeared. Our quantum communication networks have reduced message delay times across the galaxy by 60%. Our agricultural techniques have increased food production on 17 worlds. Lucky accidents, Vexthal dismissed with a wave of his clawed hand. Primitive tinkering that happened to work. This is not the same as true scientific understanding. Jake felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He had heard variations of this argument countless times over the years. No matter what humans accomplished, it was always dismissed as luck, accident, or primitive copying of superior alien technology. From the Hive Mind Unity section, thousands of small insect-like creatures spoke in perfect unison. The humans are chaotically individualistic. They cannot think as one. They cannot plan efficiently. They are unpredictable, and therefore unreliable partners. Our individualism has led to creative solutions that groupthink often misses. Jake responded. The diversity of human thought has been one of our greatest strengths. Our greatest weakness, came a new voice. The ancient preserver's representative was so old that parts of his stone-like body had crystals growing from them. You have been part of galactic civilization for only 50 years. We have maintained order for 50,000. You are children, trying to sit at the adults' table. Jake noticed Dr. Lisa Grant in the observation section above. She was humanity's chief scientist on the station, and one of the few people who truly understood what was at stake here. She gave him the slightest nod. They both knew this was going exactly as predicted. With respect, honored ancient, Jake said, sometimes fresh perspectives can solve old problems. The refugee crisis on Kepler 442b was resolved using human logistics, methods that none of the established species had considered. One small success does not make you ready for full membership, Vexthal interrupted. The responsibilities of council membership require wisdom that comes only with time and proven. stability. The debate continued for 2 more hours. Each species took turns explaining why humanity wasn't ready. The Aquatic Confederation said humans were too aggressive. The Gaseous Collective claimed humans were too solid-minded to understand their perspective. The Machine Symbiosis argued that humans were too biological to make logical decisions. Jake answered each criticism with examples of human achievements, human cooperation, human growth. But he could see it was pointless. The decision had been made before he ever entered the chamber. Finally, Chancellor Vexthul called for the formal vote. All those in favor of granting humanity full membership in the Galactic Council? Silence filled the chamber. All those in favor of maintaining humanity's current probationary status for another 100 years? Every species raised their voting symbols. 12 different ways of saying the same thing. Rejection. The vote is unanimous, Vexthul announced. Humanity will remain under probationary status. This session is concluded. Jake stood perfectly still for a moment, letting the weight of the decision settle over him. 50 years of human effort, dismissed in a single vote. 50 years of contributions, treated as if they meant nothing. He walked to the center of the chamber speaking area and bowed formally to each section in turn. I thank the honored council for their time and consideration. Humanity accepts your decision and appreciates the opportunity to present our case. As he turned to leave, Jake paused. The words he spoke next were quiet, almost casual, the kind of statement that might be easily forgotten in the aftermath of such a momentous decision. We understand your position completely. Then he walked out of the chamber, his footsteps echoing. In the sudden quiet, Dr. Grant met him in the corridor outside. She was a small woman with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been on Arcturus Station for 15 years, building relationships with alien scientists and studying their technologies. That went exactly as we expected, she said quietly as they walked toward the human quarters. Every single objection, Jake agreed. Primitive, lucky, unreliable, chaotic, children. He shook his head. 50 years, and they still see us the way. Same way they did when we first made contact. Perhaps that's for the best, Lisa said, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. If they truly understood what we're capable of, they might not have been so quick to dismiss us. They reached the secure communication room in the human diplomatic section. Jake sat down at the quantum transmitter and began encoding a message. The encryption was purely human-designed, something the aliens had never shown interest in learning. Message to all human colonies and stations, he dictated. Authorization code, Prometheus 7. The Council has spoken. Implementation of Protocol Exodus is approved. Begin Phase 1 immediately. Lisa worked at another console, sending her own messages to human scientists throughout the galaxy. Her communications used academic channels that the aliens monitored, but never paid close attention to. Just routine research coordination, as far as anyone watching would know. How long do you think we have before they realize? She asked. Jake finished his transmission and leaned back in his chair. Years, probably. They're so convinced of their own superiority that they won't notice what's happening until it's too late. And if they do notice early, then we accelerate. The timeline. Jake stood up and walked to the small window that looked out into space. Beyond the station, he could see ships from dozens of different species coming and going. Trade vessels, exploration ships, military patrols. The busy traffic of a galaxy that thought it had everything figured out. They think we're children, he said softly. Children who got lucky a few times, but don't really understand the adult world. They have no idea that we've been preparing for this day since the moment we first realized we would never be accepted as equals. Lisa joined him at the window. The hardest part will be keeping quiet about it. No dramatic speeches, no angry departures, just ... Fade away. That's exactly what makes it work, Jake replied. They expect humans to be emotional and unpredictable. The last thing they'll expect is for us to simply disappear without making a fuss about it. The message confirmations began coming in from across the galaxy. Human colonies acknowledging the order. Human scientists beginning to close down there. Research projects. Human traders starting to wind down their operations. It had begun. Captain Roy Patterson stood on the observation deck of Mars Station Beta, watching the last transport ship disappear into the darkness of space. The red planet stretched out below him, its surface dotted with human settlements that had been home to 3 million people just 6 months ago. Now those settlements looked empty from orbit, but Roy knew better. Everything valuable had been quietly removed. Every piece of advanced technology, every research file, every prototype weapon system. To any casual observer, it looked like the humans were simply upgrading their facilities. Sir, the Corvin inspection. Team is requesting permission to dock. Lieutenant Sam Hayes reported from behind him. Roy turned away from the window. Grant them permission. Make sure they see exactly what we want them to see. The Corvin trade delegation had been sniffing around human operations for months, ever since rumors started that humans were scaling back their mining operations. Trade Minister Ziegler was suspicious by nature, but he was also greedy. If humans were abandoning profitable ventures, he wanted to know why. Roy walked down to the docking bay to meet the aliens personally. It was important to seem cooperative and normal. The Corvin shuttle was larger than necessary, a show of wealth and power that Roy had grown used to over the years. Ziegler emerged first, his metallic body gleaming under the station's lights. Behind him came 3 smaller Corvins carrying scanning equipment. They always brought scanners, as if humans might be hiding something valuable. Captain Patterson. Ziegler's voice had a ringing quality, like metal being struck. We are here to discuss the mining rights you are abandoning in the asteroid belt. Of course, Roy replied with a smile. Though I should mention, we're not abandoning anything. We're simply consolidating operations for greater efficiency. It was technically true. They were consolidating everything into transport ships that would carry it all far away from this galaxy. But Ziegler didn't need to know that. They toured the station's mining control center, where human technicians showed the Corvin's outdated equipment and simplified mining schedules. The real control systems had been quietly moved months ago. What the aliens saw was functional but primitive, exactly what they expected from human technology. Your yields have dropped significantly. One of the junior Corvins observed, studying the false data they were being shown. Market fluctuations, Roy explained easily. We're focusing on quality over quantity now. Better to extract premium ores, slowly, and flood the market with inferior materials. Ziegler's mechanical eyes whirred as they focused on Roy. This is very different from human behavior we have observed before. Usually, your species prioritizes speed and volume. Roy kept his expression neutral. The alien was smart and suspicious, but he was also arrogant, which made him predictable. We're learning from our mistakes. Sometimes the old ways aren't the best ways. After the inspection, Roy watched the Corvin shuttle depart. They had seen nothing suspicious, but they also hadn't seen the truth. Hidden in the station's lower levels, massive transport containers waited to be loaded onto the next outbound freighter. Everything that made Mars Station Beta valuable to humanity was slowly being moved away. 3,000 light-years away, engineer Kate Sullivan was performing a similar dance on Europa Station. The ice moon of Jupiter had become humanity's center for quantum communication research, and Kate's job was to dismantle it all without anyone noticing. The ethereal collective had representatives on the station, beings of pure energy who claimed to understand quantum mechanics better than any physical species. They floated through the research labs like glowing ghosts, observing human work with what Kate had learned to recognize as condescension. The quantum entanglement chambers seem less active lately. One of the ethereals communicated directly. Into Kate's mind, the sensation always made her skin crawl. We're running efficiency tests, Kate replied out loud. She had learned that speaking aloud sometimes confused the ethereals, who preferred mental communication. Trying to reduce power consumption while maintaining signal strength. It was partially true. They were testing efficiency, but not for the reasons she claimed. Every piece of quantum communication equipment was being carefully studied and copied before being packed away. The humans were leaving nothing behind that could be reverse-engineered. Kate led the ethereal to a laboratory where her team was supposedly working on improvements to the quantum transceivers. In reality, they were installing deliberate flaws in the equipment they were leaving behind. The transceivers would work for a few more years, then begin failing in ways that would be difficult to diagnose. Human methods are so inefficient, the ethereal pulsed with what Kate recognized as amusement. But sometimes inefficiency has unexpected benefits. We do our best with what we understand, Kate replied humbly. The alien had no idea the human. Quantum technology was actually decades ahead of what the galaxy used. They had been careful to share only their older, simpler designs. Dr. Alan Price faced the most complex challenge of all. Terra Nova was humanity's largest colony world outside of Earth, home to 30,000 humans and the center of agricultural research that fed dozens of other worlds. Making 30,000 people disappear without anyone noticing required. Careful planning and perfect timing got Alan stood in his office, looking out at the vast grain fields that stretched to the horizon. Automated harvesters moved through the crops, but there were fewer of them than there had been a month ago. The reduction was subtle, explained as routine maintenance and upgrades. Dr. Price, the Aquatic Confederation, is requesting an update. On the kelp farming project, his assistant, Nancy Bell, informed him from the doorway. Tell them we're seeing promising results, but we need another season to gather complete data, Alan replied. The kelp project was real, but the results had been compiled months ago. They were stalling for time while the last human families prepared to leave. The evacuation was happening in stages. Families were leaving for extended visits to relatives, or educational opportunities on other worlds, or temporary work assignments. Each departure looked normal by itself, but together they represented a massive population shift. Alan's biggest challenge was the non-human. Observers on Terra Nova, the planet hosted research teams from 6 different species, all studying human agricultural methods. They lived in their own compounds, but they paid attention to human activities. The solution was to replace the departing humans with temporary workers from other human colonies. The alien observers saw humans coming and going, which was normal. They didn't realize that the humans leaving never came back, while the ones arriving were only staying long enough to maintain the illusion of normal activity. Commander, Helen Ward was handling an even more delicate situation. As the human military liaison to the Galactic Peacekeeping Force, she had access to classified information about ongoing conflicts throughout the galaxy. Her job was to extract human military advisors from alien conflicts without raising suspicions. Helen sat in her office on Peacekeeping Station Alpha, reviewing deployment reports. Officially, she was rotating human personnel for routine rest and retraining. In reality, she was pulling every human military advisor out of active service. The timing was perfect. The galaxy was relatively peaceful, with only minor conflicts that didn't require major intervention. The human advisors could be withdrawn without immediately affecting ongoing operations. Commander, the Zeltharian Defense Minister is asking about the recall of Lieutenant Commander Tony Green, her aide reported. Tell him that Green is attending advanced strategic planning courses on Earth, Helen replied. He'll be available. For reassignment in 6 months. 6 months would be far too late. By then, every human in military service would be light years away from this galaxy. The most difficult part was maintaining normal communications while an evacuation proceeded. Dr. Grant had returned to Earth to coordinate the scientific withdrawal, but she maintained regular contact with her colleagues throughout the galaxy. Her messages appeared routine to any alien monitoring system. Updates on research projects, requests for equipment, personnel transfers for career development. Hidden. In the academic language and scientific jargon were the real messages, evacuation schedules, pickup coordinates, and security protocols. The aliens saw what they expected to see. Humans being humans, inefficient and disorganized, but generally harmless. They had no reason to look deeper or question the patterns they were observing. On Earth, President Jack Tyler met with his cabinet in a secure room deep beneath the Capitol building. The meeting was officially about trade negotiations with the Corvan Empire. In reality, they were finalizing humanity's departure from known space. All evacuation ships are in position, reported Admiral Ben Cooper via secure transmission. We can begin final phase operations on your order. How long until we're completely clear? Tyler asked. 72 hours from the start signal. Every human installation, every piece of technology, every research project will be removed or destroyed. Tyler nodded slowly. 50 years of human presence in galactic civilization erased in 3 days. And our destination? The Void region is ready to receive us. Our advanced scouts have identified suitable systems, and the construction fleets are already building infrastructure. Admiral Ben Cooper stood on the bridge of the colony ship New Horizon, watching the countdown timer on his main display. 72 hours had become 72 minutes, then 72 seconds. Now it showed zeros across the board. All stations. Report ready, Admiral, reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Karen Stone. Ben took a deep breath. 3 years of planning had led to this moment. Across the galaxy, every human settlement, every human ship, every human citizen was ready to leave. They had practiced this moment countless times in secret simulations. Send the signal, Ben ordered quietly. The message that went out was simple. The eagle has left the nest. Within minutes, responses began coming back from across known space. Human colonies, research stations, trading posts, and diplomatic missions, all confirming the same thing. They were leaving. On Ceres Prime, the agricultural world that fed 15 other planets, Farmer Doug Mitchell stood in his empty house one. Last time, the transport ships had already taken his neighbors, his equipment, and his livestock. The vast fields outside were still green and growing, but there would be no one left to harvest them. The alien settlers on Ceres Prime were mostly aquatic Confederation members who had built their communities near the planet's rivers and lakes. They had always been friendly enough, but they treated the human farmers like simple laborers who happened to know a few useful tricks. Doug walked out to his truck, an old human-made vehicle that he had decided to leave behind. It would be one of the few clues that humans had ever lived here. He climbed into the passenger seat of the transport that would take him to the evacuation ship. Strange to leave it all behind, said his neighbor, Carol Anderson, as they drove away from the settlement. Not strange, Doug replied, looking back at the farms they had built from nothing. Necessary. The alien settlements would realize what had happened when they woke up in the morning. The humans who ran the power plants maintained the water systems and managed the food distribution networks would simply be gone. The technical manuals and operational procedures had all been removed or destroyed. 3,000 light-years away, Dr. Claire Adams locked her laboratory at the Galactic Medical Center for the final time. Her research into universal vaccines had been the foundation of modern galactic medicine, but the aliens had always assumed she was just following procedures developed by superior species. The truth was more complicated. Human medical research was decades ahead of galactic standards, but Claire had been careful to share only simplified versions of her work. The real breakthroughs, the fundamental principles that made the treatments work, had never been written down where alien scientists could find them. Claire's assistant, Dr. Kevin Brown, waited for her in the hallway. He was one of the few humans still on the station, helping with the final evacuation of medical personnel. The Ethereal Collective sent another message, Kevin reported. They want to discuss expanding the vaccine production program. Send them my regrets, Claire replied, placing her hand on the lab's biometric scanner one last time. The system would lock down permanently after she left, denying access to anyone without human genetic markers. Tell them I've been called away on a family emergency. It wasn't entirely untrue. Humanity was her family, and leaving the galaxy behind was definitely an emergency of sorts. The medical center would struggle without human expertise. The alien doctors had learned to use human-developed treatments, but they didn't understand how those treatments actually worked. They would be able to maintain existing procedures for a while, but they wouldn't be able to develop new ones or fix problems when they arose. On Jupiter's moon, Europa, Kate Sullivan initiated the final shutdown of the quantum communication network. The aliens thought the system was maintained by automated processes, but the reality was the humans monitored and adjusted it constantly. Without that maintenance, the network would begin degrading within days. Kate stood in the main control room, her hands moving across control panels that she had helped design. Each switch she turned, each system she shut down, was another connection severed between the human colonies and the galactic civilization they were leaving behind. All primary nodes are offline, reported her technician, Gary White. Secondary backup systems will function for approximately 6 months before requiring manual maintenance. 6 months should be enough time for them to figure out they have a problem, Kate replied. Whether they can fix it without us is another question entirely. The quantum communication system was more complex than the aliens realized. It required constant fine-tuning, regular replacement of quantum-entangled components, and deep understanding of quantum mechanics that went beyond what most galactic species possessed. The humans had been the invisible backbone of the entire network. Trade. Minister Ziegther of the Corvin Empire arrived at the Jupiter Mining Consortium, headquarters expecting to meet with human administrators about expanding mining operations in the asteroid belt. Instead, he found empty offices and deactivated equipment. The human secretary's desk was cleared out. The meeting rooms were empty. The massive holographic displays that usually showed mining operations throughout the solar system were dark and silent. Ziegther's mechanical body whirred with agitation as he searched the facility. The humans had been managing mining operations that supplied rare metals to half the galaxy. Tritium for fusion reactors, rare earths for quantum computers, exotic materials for faster-than-light travel systems. Where are the humans? He demanded of a maintenance robot that was still functioning. Human personnel have departed, the robot replied in its flat mechanical voice. No forwarding information available. Ziegther tried to access the mining control systems, but they required human biometric authorization. The backup systems were either locked down or had been completely removed. Decades of operational data, mining surveys, and equipment specifications had vanished with the humans. On Terra Nova, the alien research teams woke up to find the human settlements completely empty. Dr. Yixtel of the Ethereal Collective floated through the abandoned administrative building, trying to understand what had happened. The humans had been there yesterday. Farmer Dan Miller had been discussing crop rotation schedules. Agricultural specialist Beth Taylor had been reviewing grain production reports. The human children had been playing in the settlement's central park. Now there was nothing. Empty houses, empty offices, empty schools. The equipment was gone. The vehicles were gone. The people were gone. It was as if 30,000 humans had simply evaporated overnight. The automated farming systems were still running, but they were operating on basic programs that would only last for weeks without human oversight. The complex algorithms that optimized crop yields, managed soil nutrition, and coordinated harvesting schedules required human input to function properly. Chancellor Vexthil of the Zeltharian Empire was attending a routine military briefing when the first reports began. Arriving, human military advisors assigned to various conflicts had failed to report for duty. Human technicians maintaining communication equipment on military bases couldn't be contacted. Human logistics coordinators managing supply lines had disappeared. This cannot be a coincidence, Vexthal hissed to his aide. Humans do not coordinate well enough for simultaneous actions across the galaxy, but the evidence was undeniable. From the core worlds to the outer rim, every human presence had vanished within the same 72-hour period. It was the kind of coordinated operation that the Galactic Council had always claimed humans were too chaotic and individualistic to achieve. Admiral Cooper watched the final evacuation ships leave their pickup points throughout the galaxy. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned. No dramatic announcements, no angry ultimatums, no threats or demands. Humanity was simply leaving as quietly as they had lived among the other species. All evacuation fleets report successful departure, Lieutenant Stone announced. Total human population extracted, 47,800,000. Ben nodded slowly. Nearly 50 million humans, scattered across dozens of worlds and hundreds of installations, had vanished from galactic civilization in 3 days. It was the largest coordinated operation in galactic history, and most species wouldn't even realize it had happened for several more days. Set course for the void, Ben ordered. Time to go home. The New Horizons engines engaged, and the massive colony ship began its journey toward the galaxy's edge. Behind them, other human ships were making the same journey. Transport vessels, research ships, military escorts, civilian freighters. An entire civilization moving to a new home. As they traveled, Ben received reports from the various evacuation fleets. The withdrawal had been complete. Every piece of human technology that could be moved had been taken. Everything else had been destroyed or sabotaged to prevent. Reverse-engineering. The aliens would wake up tomorrow to find that the primitive species they had dismissed for 50 years had vanished without a trace, taking with them the invisible foundation that had held their civilization together. In the communications room of New Horizon, the last message from the old galaxy was being received. It was from Commander Pete Johnson, who had volunteered to remain behind at a remote monitoring station to observe the aftermath of humanity's departure. Chancellor Vexthal stood in the emergency session chamber, his scales dark with anger and confusion. It had been 1 year since the humans disappeared, and the galaxy was falling apart. What had started as minor inconveniences had grown into major disasters. The situation reports, he demanded from his aide. The young Zeltharian officer read from his datapad with a trembling voice. Food production on 17 worlds has dropped by 60%. The automated farming systems are failing without human maintenance. 3 major trade routes have become unusable due to navigation system failures. And the Sekthari Empire has begun their invasion of the Outer Rim. Vexthal's claws scraped against his chair. The Sekthari had been threatening war for decades, but they had never acted because the galactic defense systems were too strong. Now, with communication networks failing and supply lines collapsing, they saw their chance. What about our military response to the Sekthari invasion? Vexthal asked. That is the problem, Chancellor. Our forces cannot coordinate properly. The quantum communication arrays that humans maintained are failing one by one. Fleet commanders cannot communicate with their home bases. Supply ships are getting lost because the navigation beacons are going offline. In the Corvin trade sector, Minister Zeikther was discovering just how dependent his empire had become on human technology. The asteroid mining operations that supplied rare metals to dozens of worlds had ground to a halt. The equipment was still there, but no one knew how to operate it properly. The fusion reactor maintenance schedules make no sense, his chief engineer reported. The humans used symbols and calculations that we cannot understand. When we try to follow their procedures, the reactors become unstable. Zeikther's mechanical body sparked with frustration. They are primitive fusion reactors. How difficult can they be to maintain? Apparently more difficult than we thought. Minister, 3 reactors have already had emergency shutdowns. 2 space stations have lost power completely. The Corvins had always mocked human fusion technology as simple and outdated. Their own antimatter cores were far more powerful. But antimatter was expensive and dangerous to produce. The stable, reliable human fusion reactors had been used everywhere that consistent power was needed. Now those reactors were failing, and the Corvins discovered that they had never actually understood how they worked. The humans had made them look simple, but the engineering behind them was far more complex than anyone had realized. On the medical research station orbiting Rigel, Dr. Zextal of the Ethereal Collective was facing a crisis that would have seemed impossible a year ago. A plague had broken out on 3 worlds in the Outer Rim, and none of the standard treatments were working. "We need to develop new vaccines," Dr. Zextal communicated to his research team. "The human protocols are not sufficient." But as they tried to modify the human-developed vaccines, they discovered a problem. The humans had shared the final products and the basic procedures, but they had never explained the fundamental science behind how the vaccines actually worked. The Ethereals could produce more of the existing vaccines by following the procedures exactly, but they couldn't adapt them for new diseases. They couldn't troubleshoot problems when the production process went wrong. They couldn't develop improvements or variations. "Perhaps we should contact the humans for assistance," suggested one of the junior researchers. "The humans are gone," Dr. Zextal replied with growing frustration, "and we cannot locate them. The long-range communication systems they built are no longer functioning." That was another problem that was becoming more serious each day. The galaxy's communication network had been built and maintained by humans for 50 years. Other species had used it, relied on it, taken it for granted. But they had never learned how to fix it when things went wrong. Commander Vekvar of the Galactic Defense Force stood in his command center, watching his tactical displays flicker and fail. The Sekthari invasion fleet was pushing deeper into civilized space, and his forces were powerless to stop them. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Third Fleet," reported his communications officer. "When?" 18 hours ago. "The quantum relay stations they were using went offline. We cannot re-establish contact." Vekvar looked at his strategic map. Red warning symbols marked Sekthari advances across 3 sectors. His own forces were scattered and confused, unable to coordinate their movements or share intelligence. Humans had always been involved in military operations, but never in leadership roles. They served as advisors, analysts, and logistics coordinators. The other species had made the important decisions and led the battles. Now, Vekvar realized that the humans had been doing far more than anyone understood. They had been the ones who made sure information flowed properly between different military units. They had managed the complex supply chains and kept military forces equipped and fed. They had maintained the communication systems that allowed coordinated operations across multiple star systems. Without them, the galactic military was just a collection of individual units with no way to work together effectively. On Ceres Prime, the agricultural world was dying. The alien colonists had watched the human farmers leave with amusement, thinking they could easily manage the farms themselves. After all, how hard could it be to grow food? Very hard, it turned out. The automated systems that the humans had left behind were incredibly sophisticated, but they required constant adjustment and maintenance. Soil conditions changed with the weather. Plant diseases required immediate treatment. Equipment needed repairs that could only be done by people who understood how it worked. Colony Administrator Veloth of the Aquatic Confederation stood in what had been the main human settlement, now empty and overgrown with weeds. The food production that had once fed 15 worlds had dropped to almost nothing. How long before the emergency food supplies run out? He asked his aide. 3 months, possibly 4 if we implement strict rationing. Veloth had never paid much attention to the human farmers. They seemed like simple people who worked with dirt and plants. He had assumed that feeding people was a basic skill that any intelligent species could master. He had been wrong. The humans hadn't just been growing food. They had been managing an incredibly complex ecosystem that balanced soil chemistry, water distribution, pest control, and crop rotation across an entire planet. It was a science that took decades to learn and generations to perfect. Back on Arcturus Station, Chancellor Vexthul called for another emergency session of the Galactic Council. Representatives from all 12 species gathered, but their usual confidence was gone. Everyone looked worried and desperate. We need to discuss our options. Vexthul announced. The human departure has caused more disruption than anyone anticipated. Trade Minister Ziegther's voice had a harsh edge. Disruption? Half of my trade empire has collapsed. Mining operations have shut down. Manufacturing plants cannot get the materials they need. This is not disruption. This is catastrophe, Dr. Zextal pulsed with agitation. A medical crisis is spreading. Without human pharmaceutical knowledge, we cannot treat diseases that were easily curable just 1 year ago. The military situation is even worse, added Commander Thekvar. The Sekthari have conquered 12 star systems because our forces cannot coordinate their response. They are advancing faster than we can retreat. Ancient preserver Kelanurith spoke with the wisdom of 50,000 years. Perhaps we underestimated the humans' contributions to our civilization. Underestimated? Ziegther's mechanical voice screeched. They were supposed to be primitive. Their technology was supposed to be simple. How were we supposed to know that our entire economy depended on their maintenance? Because we never bothered to learn, Dr. Zextal admitted quietly. We used their technology, but we never studied it. We relied on their expertise, but we never tried to understand it ourselves. The truth was becoming clear to all of them. For 50 years, humanity had been quietly maintaining the invisible infrastructure that held galactic civilization together. They had been the engineers who kept the power flowing, the farmers who kept the food coming, the technicians who kept the communications working, the doctors who kept the diseases controlled. The other species had seen them as junior partners, primitive newcomers who were lucky to be included in galactic society. In reality, they had been the foundation that everything else was built on. We need to contact them, Vexthul decided. Offer them full membership, whatever they want. We need them to come back. How? Asked Commander Thekvar. The communication systems they built are failing. We have no way to reach them. That was when they realized the full scope of their problem. The humans hadn't just left. They had taken with them the knowledge and technology needed to find them again. The galaxy was left with systems they didn't understand, problems they couldn't solve, and no way to contact the people who could help them. Commander Pete Johnson sat in his remote monitoring station, listening to the desperate communications coming from the old galaxy. He was the only human left behind, hidden in a research outpost that the aliens had forgotten existed. His job was to observe and report back to the human fleet. For a year, he had watched the galaxy slowly collapse, as one system after another failed without human maintenance. President Jack Tyler stood on the observation deck of New Eden Station, looking out at the thriving civilization humanity had built in just 4 years. Ships moved between orbital platforms and asteroid mining facilities. Transport vessels carried goods between the dozen worlds that humans now called home. Everything was clean, efficient, and peaceful. The latest reports from the old galaxy, sir, his aide, Captain Lisa Adams, handed him a data pad. Jack read through the summary with grim satisfaction. The Sekthari Empire now controlled half of known space. Trade routes had collapsed entirely. Famine was spreading across agricultural worlds that could no longer feed themselves. Medical facilities were closing because they couldn't treat basic diseases without human expertise. Any word from Pete Johnson? Jack asked. He transmitted his weekly report yesterday. The Galactic Council has sent 17 more messages requesting negotiations. Chancellor Vexthul is offering full membership, equal voting rights, and territorial concessions. Jack handed the datapad back without comment. 4 years too late for offers like that. Humanity had found something much better than membership in a failing galactic civilization. Dr. Lisa Grant walked through the research complex on Science Station Alpha, marveling at what they had accomplished, without the need to hide their capabilities or share their discoveries with species who dismissed them as primitive. Human science had advanced faster than ever before. The new fusion designs are ready for testing, reported Dr. Kevin Brown, her former assistant, who is now leading his own research team. These should be 3 times more efficient than anything we shared with the galaxy. Excellent. What about the medical research? We've solved the cellular regeneration problem. Life extension treatments are ready for human trials. And the Disease Immunity Project has produced vaccines that work against biological agents we've never even encountered. Lisa smiled. All of this had been possible while they lived among the aliens, but they had kept it secret. Sharing advanced technology with species who called them primitive had seemed pointless. Now they could develop their full potential without worrying about alien judgment or interference. On the agricultural world of New Terra, Farmer Doug Mitchell supervised the harvest of crops that produced twice the yield of anything grown in the old galaxy. The farming techniques developed here were revolutionary, but they built on knowledge that humans had possessed for decades. How are the new settlements doing? Asked his neighbor, Carol Anderson, as they watched automated harvesters gather grain that would feed millions. Better than expected. We've got 15 agricultural worlds producing food now, and 3 more being terraformed. We could probably feed the entire old galaxy if we wanted to, which they didn't. The species that had dismissed human farming as simple dirt work were now facing starvation because they couldn't manage basic crop production without human guidance. Admiral Ben Cooper reviewed the military reports in his office aboard the flagship New Horizon. 4 years of peace had allowed humanity to build a defense force that was decades ahead of anything in the old galaxy. Our scout ships report that the Sekthari have reached the core worlds, reported Commander Helen Ward. They're meeting almost. No resistance. The Galactic Defense Forces can't coordinate well enough to mount an effective campaign. Ben nodded thoughtfully. The Sekthari had always been aggressive, but they had been held in check by superior galactic military organization. Without human logistics and communication expertise, that organization had collapsed completely. Any signs that they're looking? For us? Ben asked. None, sir. They probably don't even know we exist anymore. As far as the galaxy is concerned, humans just vanished, which was exactly what humanity had intended. Let the aliens think they had simply given up and gone home to Earth. The truth was that humanity had moved beyond their old galaxy entirely, establishing a civilization in what other species had considered empty space, the void, as aliens called. It turned out to be rich with resources and perfectly habitable worlds. The energy fields and gravitational anomalies that other species feared were actually beneficial to human technology. Space that seemed dangerous and impossible to navigate was actually easier for humans to traverse than the crowded shipping lanes of the old. Galaxy engineer Kate Sullivan worked in her laboratory on Engineering Station Beta, developing faster than light travel systems that didn't rely on the jump gate networks that other species used. Human ships could now travel anywhere in their new territory without depending on fixed infrastructure. The new drive systems are ready for deployment, she reported to Admiral Cooper during their weekly conference. We can reach any of our worlds within days, and we're completely independent of external navigation systems. It was another technology that humans had been developing in secret while living among the aliens. The jump gate networks that connected the old galaxy were complex and expensive to maintain. Human scientists had found better ways to travel between stars, but they had kept those discoveries hidden. Now, those discoveries allowed humanity to build a civilization that was more connected and efficient than anything in the old galaxy. Even before the current collapse. Trade, Minister Paul Roberts reviewed the economic reports from all human worlds. Without the need to compete with alien corporations or follow galactic trade regulations, human commerce had flourished. Production is up 30% across all sectors, he reported to President Tyler. Mining operations are producing materials we need for expansion. Manufacturing is creating goods that surpass anything we made in the old galaxy. And we're completely self-sufficient. The economic independence was perhaps humanity's greatest achievement. For 50 years, they had been junior partners in galactic trade, selling raw materials and buying finished goods from more advanced species. Now they discovered that human manufacturing capabilities were actually superior to most galactic. Production. Dr. Alan Price stood in the main laboratory of Medical Research Station Gamma, surrounded by breakthrough discoveries that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. Human medical science had advanced by centuries in the time since they left the old galaxy. The life extension treatments are showing remarkable results, he reported to Dr. Grant during their monthly research review. Human lifespan could be extended to several centuries with no negative side effects, and we've developed cures for every major disease that affects human physiology. It was medical knowledge that could have helped billions of beings in the old galaxy. But those beings had never appreciated human medical contributions, dismissing them as lucky accidents or primitive copying of superior alien techniques. Now, that knowledge would benefit only humanity, while the old galaxy struggled with medical crises they couldn't solve. Communications Officer Nancy Bell sat in the monitoring station that tracked transmissions from the old galaxy. The messages coming through were increasingly desperate. Chancellor Vexthill's latest transmission was typical. To the human leadership, wherever you may be, the Galactic Council formally apologizes for our previous decisions regarding human membership. We offer full recognition, equal status, and shared governance of galactic affairs. Please respond. Nancy filed the message with all the others. Hundreds of similar transmissions had been received over the past 4 years. Offers of membership, apologies for past treatment, desperate pleas for assistance. All of them went unanswered. The final message in the day's batch was different. It came from Commander Pete Johnson, still maintaining his lonely watch at the edge of the old galaxy. New Eden Station. This is Observatory Post 7. The Sectari Empire has reached Arcturus Station. Chancellor Vexthill and the Galactic Council have evacuated to the Outer Rim. Galactic civilization as we knew it is effectively ended. Recommend terminating observation mission and returning to New Eden. There's nothing left here worth watching. Nancy forwarded the message to President Tyler and Admiral Cooper. The decision would be made quickly. Pete Johnson had volunteered to stay behind and observe the consequences of humanity's departure. His mission was complete. President Tyler called a meeting of the Human Council to discuss Pete's final report. The leadership of humanity's new civilization gathered in the council chamber on New Eden Station. The old galaxy is finished, Tyler announced. The question now is whether we have any obligations to assist. We offered to help for 50 years, Admiral Cooper pointed out. They consistently rejected our contributions and dismissed our capabilities. Now they want our help when it's too late to matter. Dr. Grant spoke thoughtfully. From a scientific perspective, we could easily solve their problems. Our technology is now advanced enough to restore their civilization within a few years. But should we? Asked Trade Minister Roberts. They made it clear that they didn't value our partnership when they thought they didn't need us. The debate continued for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. Humanity had moved beyond the old galaxy. They had built something better, something that belonged entirely to them. Going back would mean returning to a position of servitude to species that had never respected them. Send a final message to the old galaxy, Tyler decided. Make it clear that humanity has moved on. We're not coming back.